I used to be afraid of, sleeping in other people's houses or not in my own bed. And then I just end up sleeping at someone else's house once, and I didn't even think about it. And then the next day I was like, oh, wait, I slept in someone else's house. I didn't even, I think that's such a big point, is like, you just need to keep living your life, like keep allowing things to happen. And sometimes things will naturally happen without you even controlling it or actively trying to overcome something. It will just happen, and then you look back and think, oh, I did that without even thinking about it.
Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another really special Talking Insomnia episode. We have Maja with us. Welcome.
Hi, it's really exciting to be on here, because I remember when I was in the depths of it, I told myself one day I'll be on your channel saying how I'm okay, and there were times where I didn't fully believe it, but I'm here now. So
incredible. I'm so glad you are, and I bet a lot of people will resonate with what you said. And it's kind of a virtuous cycle, because you're here now inspiring other people. Now they will become guests, etc., etc. So anyway, super glad you're here. And you have been actually part of our Insomnia Immunity program, done BedTyme. You've done a few calls with Michelle, so you've really been part of our community. But what sparked this interview was actually you voluntarily. You emailed me and said, "Hey, Daniel, I'd like to share my story, particularly." Because you had some chronic health issues. So I was like, yes, we definitely want to hear it. So with that said, tell us in your words, how did you start having trouble sleeping, Maja?
So this all started kind of in October 2021. So a year and a half ago now. I have to say I've been sleeping fine for a while now. It just took me some time to get the confidence to actually talk about it. But it started in autumn 2021. And before that, I was always a great sleeper. Well, I say that actually, I did have different sleep disturbances over my life that probably just point to, dysregulated nervous system. But I never had issues falling asleep. And I would close my eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, and wake up the next day. So I was really tight sleeper, no issues there. And then kind of 2021 was kind of like a challenging year for me a little bit. And I moved house, and I remember I moved house and I couldn't sleep in my new room, which kind of freaked me out, but it was fine. That kind of normalized. But I guess there were, the sleep disturbances kind of started. And also during that time, my mental health was really going downhill in general. And I started having panic attacks in the night. I would just wake up with panic attacks. And I remember at the time I was really freaked out that maybe that's seizures, which feels so stupid to say, but I've heard other people say stuff like that. So, so the sleep disturbances were there, but it wasn't that bad anymore. But then what happened then, separate from my sleep, I started struggling during that same time, because it all came from the same kind of burnout mental health dip that I had. I started struggling with chronic dizziness, and I was going to lots of doctors everywhere. No one could really explain it. They were just oh, it's going to be a chronic thing that you probably just need to learn to deal with. And it was really debilitating at the time, and it kept getting worse because obviously anxiety obviously makes it worse, and it was very tied into my mental health. I know now. I still struggle with it, but it's more bearable. And one of the things that I kept hearing at the time was make sure that you're sleeping enough and make sure that you're sleeping fine. And before, I never thought about, it was never, I never put some pressure on myself to sleep or anything. It was just something I did naturally. And then suddenly that was, and then I started to think about it, and I was actually, I haven't been sleeping that well. I've not been getting my 8-9 hours in. I've been actually having panic attacks. And then I started to listen to meditations before I go to sleep, and that helped, but then it stopped helping. And my sleep was getting worse all of a sudden. And then just falling asleep became really hard. And I remember even at the time I was on a lot of like Facebook support groups for like my health issues, for my dizziness, which I know like dizziness doesn't sound that bad, but it was actually really like it was really it was like a 24/7 constantly off balance. Like I was struggling to read, I was struggling at work, so it was really debilitating, and I was desperate to come out of it. And I remember and I will say like chronic health issues Facebook support groups are about as grim as insomnia support groups. It's like, it's a dark, dark place. But I just kept reading, you know, how people were saying, like, you just need to sleep. Like, if you don't sleep, you'll never get better. Yeah, I just started sleeping less and less. And what was happening to me a lot was that I would kind of close my eyes, doze off, and then wake up thinking I never fell asleep, but like I was just very close to sleeping, which now I know I must have fallen asleep for like maybe 15 minutes or so. Wake up and like my heart was pounding. I was just so awake. I felt so dizzy. I felt so like racing thoughts, and there was no point, like it was just impossible to get back to sleep or in that like calm state. And I was and then I remember my first sleepless night, which was like the first time in my life that I couldn't fall asleep the whole night. And I even thought in my head, like there was still some resemblance of rationality in my head. I was like, it happens, like I'll sleep tomorrow. And then I remember talking to my flatmate, and I said something like, oh, I didn't sleep the whole night. Haha, like how crazy is that? And like the shock on his face, he was like, you didn't sleep the whole night? Like, that's so bad. And that like triggered something in me. Like I remember it like it was yesterday. And that triggered some fear, like, oh my God, like maybe something's wrong with me, and I didn't consider that. And then I slept the next night, but I was really anxious in the lead up to bed for like the first time, like really, really anxious. And then I was like, okay, I had a normal sleep. Like maybe this is behind me. I slept like 12 hours that night. And then the next night, couldn't sleep the whole night again. So I was like, okay, great. Like, how are we going to tackle that? So I posted I Googled, I went on Reddit. I posted on a bunch of groups. I looked up advice online, like different breathing exercises. Someone said if you like blink your eyes like crazy for like 10 minutes, then your eyes get tired and then you fall asleep. So did that. And I just wasn't sleeping. And everything that did, like, I'm sure many people can relate. You know, I read the stories like, oh, I didn't sleep for 6 nights, or like I've had insomnia for 30 years, and all these like horror stories. And it was things that before never even crossed my mind were suddenly like real fears in my head. And then at the same time, because of all this like obviously like emotional turmoil I was going through, that really impacted like my health outside of sleep. So all of like my chronic health issues were getting much worse during that time, and obviously my brain saw the correlation and it was like, oh, I'm getting worse because I'm not sleeping. And it was really it happened quite quickly, but it went downhill really fast. So I live in London by myself. My family is back home in Slovenia, so my mom had to actually come visit me because I was just freaking out. I went to my GP at some point.
And sorry to jump in, Maya, but from like, let's say fall of 2021, how many like weeks or months into the story are we now?
Like maybe 2 weeks.
Oh, it's happening really fast.
It just happened. It really, like, I stopped sleeping, and then I just spiraled. Like, because what my reaction to stop sleeping was like, okay, let's tackle this. So I did my research, and the research made me spiral.
Yeah.
So my mom had to see me. I went to my GP, and I like begged her to give me something for sleep. And in the UK, like, they're really reluctant to give you any type of sedative and stuff. But I was like hysterical, so she prescribed me temazepam, and I felt so relieved. And then I took that, and even that didn't help. So I was like, okay, something's wrong. And then I took double the dose, which I wasn't meant to. Like, I'm not advertising that. I took double the dose. The double dose helped, but then the next night, not even the double dose helped anymore. So yeah, so that at that point, my mom came. And then it was interesting to realize, because my mom just stayed in my room with me, that when she was sleeping next to me, I did get a couple of hours of sleep. So I was like, okay, that's a sign. But everything in my life at the time, like my health, my mental health, my sleep, was just kept getting worse. So I actually had to move back home after maybe like a month of that. Because I was just not functioning and I was spiraling really bad. And that's probably around the time when I found your channel. I think I found it on one of Facebook groups, like Insomnia Facebook groups.
Yeah. And so now again, you're really impacted, really scared. And did you like take a leave of absence from work, or did you quit your job, or?
No, I took a leave of absence. Eventually, I mean, it did end up being like, it wasn't just because of sleep, obviously. It was also the other health stuff and like anxiety, really. So it ended up being like 6 months long leave of absence. But at the time, I was still kind of, yeah. So then I moved back home.
And sorry, one more question, which was, you mentioned that there was a move, that happened at the time you started having some sleep disruption. But other than that, I mean, just share whatever you're comfortable sharing. But was there some other like stress in your life that preceded all these things, or not really?
I think like there was a lot of changes I went through in 2021. Like I went through a breakup earlier in the year. I changed jobs, which was like a positive change, but it was like the new job was really stressful. I changed houses. I think at a time in my life, like I thought things were okay, but then when I look back on that period of my life, like my nervous system was going through a lot, for sure. Like lots of changes, lots of, like just unprocessed stuff in my head, which is also what led up to this like flare up with my chronic health stuff, which I did have years ago. And that's like ultimately like tied to kind of a, overactive nervous system that's just not working properly. At the time, I didn't think I was stressed. Actually, there was one other thing I forgot to mention that I wanted to mention. When all of this started, when I struggled a little bit with sleep and all this health stuff, I went to acupuncture. And actually, my first sleepless night was after my first acupuncture session. And then I kept going back, trying to fix the insomnia, and I kept making it worse. So I was like, oh my God, like my brain is broken forever because acupuncture must have done something.
Yeah. I
forgot to mention
interesting. I'm so glad you mentioned it, because yesterday I was on a call where somebody said I think it was maybe some supplement or some medication. They thought, I think that broke my sleep system. For somebody else, it's something else. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's such a common idea that I did something that broke my sleep system.
And there's
go ahead.
There's something like I realized. Obviously, like in modern society, like people struggle with sleep all the time. Like it's become a whole business. But something about the way people reacted when I said, oh, I've been struggling with sleep. And then they're like, oh, you struggling to like stay asleep or whatever. And I'm like, no, I'm just like not sleeping in the night. The way people reacted, like I remember this acupuncturist, like the shock in his eyes, like, what do you mean you didn't sleep all night? Which now I know is so normal, but that was really like making me feel like something's different about me, like something's very, very wrong.
Yeah, totally here, Maja. And again, so glad you mentioned that. I actually got this will be a 1 minute little side trip here, but I kind of got to witness that myself. I was in Spain over the summer, and I was part of this little language group. We were trying to learn Spanish together in a group setting. And one of the participants just mentioned I have some trouble sleeping, and I said, "Oh, what's going on?" And she said, "I had a little bit of insomnia." And another person in the group heard like the insomnia, and she was like, "What does that mean?" And another person said, "That's when you can't sleep." And then the other person was like, "Oh my gosh, you can't sleep!" And I just witnessed this in front of my eyes, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this poor lady! Now she gets this reaction from other people, and she really thinks something's wrong." I talked to her after that class, but anyway, that was a little side trip. But I had one more question before kind of like letting you go back to your story, which you're telling so nicely. And it is this one. Again, share whatever you're comfortable sharing. But when you refer to like chronic health issues, you mentioned like the dizziness. What other things do you refer to when you say that?
So I've had like on and off like chronic pain, and dizziness is one of them. And it's kind of like, I guess I just look at it a bit differently because it's one of those things where you go to like 3 different doctors and every doctor will tell you a different thing, and no one really like helps you. They're just like, oh, we'll get used to it, improve your lifestyle. Now I've like educated myself more on it, and it basically comes in a similar way as like chronic pain and a lot of things. It's very much tied to, you know, our nervous system, and basically, yeah, it's kind of tied into that. So there wasn't anything that they were like able to find wrong with me open tests, but I was quite disabled by it for many months actually. And it was, I would go to neurologists and they were like, well, you just kind of have to get used to it. That happens. We don't really know why. Try to not worry about. So basically that's kind of what I refer about when I talk about like the chronic health stuff. So when it comes to this sort of health stuff that seem to be connected with like nervous system, and unfortunately, as much as it's like common now, especially with like chronic stress and stuff, like we don't really know how to treat it properly. So the general advice tends to be like, make sure you sleep, make sure you exercise, like take the antidepressants, and that may or may not help type of thing. Yeah. So that's what I refer to. And like sleep is always, even I've also like struggled with my mental health over the years. And again, specifically anxiety. And again, everyone's like, make sure you sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine like so many times where people have heard that, like, make sure you sleep. And that actually leads to someone having some real insomnia struggles. But all right, thanks for sharing all this. And now, yes, back to your story. You're now like, you had this like really intense period of time. You decided to move back to Slovenia, I'm guessing, with your family. What happens next?
So that was around at that point, because I was just so distraught. I kept sleeping next to my mom. So that was, but initially that didn't help either. It was just like helping me have someone next to me. But that was around the time that I found your channel. So I watched some of your videos and I like really found myself in it. So I was like, okay, maybe. I still had lots of doubt, but I just thought maybe my brain is not permanently broken. And I also saw your app. I had your app at the same time, and I was quite relieved actually. I remember because you talked about how it's okay to not avoid things. Like basically, I don't need to avoid my bed. I don't need to. Because that was like a big thing. Like I remember I would be in my room during the day and I would be like looking at my bed and I just wanted to like sit on my bed and chill on my bed. And I was just like, nope, you're not allowed to sit down on your bed. It's that daytime. I mean, I've not actually like watched your stuff in the last 6 months, a year. So I hope you still say that and I'm not like going against that. But that was like, so that kind of just basically that I'm allowed to break this really rigid rules that you find when you Google how to help insomnia, like the whole sleep hygiene stuff. That just kind of, I still wasn't sleeping, but I felt a bit relieved. And obviously like the success stories helped. So I felt a bit relieved. So I was sleeping next to my mom and my sleep was still very patchy, but I was sleeping next to my mom. And that helped. Like I would get maybe like 4 hours of sleep. And then, but there was still this sense in my head, like, oh, I'm different because I'm not just dealing with insomnia. I'm also dealing with this other stuff. And I used to say, like, a big one was because you often talk like, oh, just like watch a movie in the night or like read. And at the time I felt too dizzy to like watch a movie because it was just really triggering. So I just felt like if I can sleep at night, I was afraid of not sleeping at night because I was like, I just have to lie there with my thoughts. And that's where like having someone next to me really helped. But then I also, I downloaded like audiobooks and stuff like that. But it was still very patchy. I was still so afraid of it. Like, yeah, sleep anxiety was really, really high. Like all day long, I was just obsessing about sleep, and I was dreading going to bed in the evening. So it was still very patchy. And
did
I
you?
had
Sorry, quick question here, Maya. But did you go in to do a lot of like these your sleep efforts, like try a lot of supplements, blackout curtains, all these things, or not so much?
I did that. I did that before finding your channel. So I would say I found your channel like a month into my insomnia.
Yeah.
So I found it quite early on, thankfully.
Yeah.
You know, that was during the phase where like I tried blinking my eyes like crazy to fall asleep and all of that. It was kind of, the supplements didn't make a difference at all. I don't know. Nothing really made a difference. The sleep meditations helped for a little bit, and then they stopped. So yeah, kind of skipped over that. But I was trying everything, like as most people do. And then after I found your channel, it was still patchy, but I did see progress. And there was even, I forgot about this, but then I looked at the emails that I sent you. I think at that point it was probably like December time of 2021, and I said, oh, I have been sleeping okay, but I'm still thinking about sleep like every day, like every waking moment of my day I'm thinking about sleep. And what really didn't help there was that I was on sick leave from work, and I didn't really have much to do, to be honest. So I would wake up, be happy I slept. You know, I think you mentioned in one of your videos, I remember something about you feel like you're in this fight with sleep. So even when you sleep, you kind of feel like you won the war, and then the next night's going to be like the same fight over and over again. Like it very much felt that way. So even when I was kind of stuck in that for a couple of weeks where it was just patchy. Some nights I would sleep, some nights I didn't. I was like, okay, I can handle one sleepless night, but what if I have 2 sleepless nights? I think that would be the breaking point. Or what if then I have 3 sleepless nights? So I was still struggling, and I was doing that for a couple of weeks, and then it became really bad again. Like sleepless, even suddenly like sleeping next to my mom didn't help. And this was end of December, beginning of January 2022. And I just really spiraled to like a really, really dark place. Like it was the first time in my life that I started to have like suicidal thoughts. And yeah, it felt hopeless, and I felt like I was getting better, and suddenly nothing was hoping. You know, I was watching the success stories, I was doing everything, and it was obviously made worse because I was dealing with the other health stuff that was also getting worse, ironically, at the same time. But I just felt really, really trapped, and it was a horrible place. And then at the same time, I was, because I was considering medication and stuff, but I just had this like obsessive need for control. I was like, I don't want to take anything, because then I don't know, like if I start an antidepressant, I don't know, have I actually solved my insomnia, or is it just the medication making me sleep and actually I'm still broken? So I had this really strong obsessive need for control when I didn't want to. It was like doing an experiment. Like I didn't want to introduce anything new to it that could impact my sleep, type of thing. That was horrible. And then that lasted a couple of weeks, and then I did end up going on antidepressant because I was just yeah. But that's not end of my insomnia stories. If anyone thinks I only got better because of antidepressants, no, it didn't. It didn't help my insomnia. It just made me not kind of made the suicidal thoughts go away. And I only stayed on it, to be honest, I only stayed on it for a month because I didn't like it, but it did pull me out of that dark place. And back onto like the sleep recovery journey where, you know, I was still really struggling, and I was still thinking about it a lot, but it gave me some hope again. And there were nights where it was better. And then during that time, I did start to just kind of, I don't know, I think your brain just adapts. Like you feel, when you feel really horrible, you feel like there's no way out, but you, over time, like your brain starts to randomly get interested in other things. And I kind of slowly started to spend a bit more time with friends, doing a bit more things, and I was still obsessing about sleep. And but there were maybe times where like I caught myself that I'm not thinking about it, and that helped. But and that was also the time where I had a couple of sessions with Michelle over this period of time. And then I also I was in the community, and I remember you were telling me a lot. You probably don't remember because you have so many people, but you kept telling me like you need to like expose yourself to sleeping alone and like not next to your mom, because it's still just avoiding. And it was just one clutch that I was so afraid to let go, because I was worried that that it's all gonna basically go to how bad it was. And then my mom got COVID and she had to sleep in a separate bed. And I slept that night. I was so terrified, but I did sleep.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
well, so glad to hear that. And you told your story. And there's more we want to talk about, of course. But so far, you told your story so nicely, so powerful story. And I can just imagine you being so scared. Your mom has COVID. You can't sleep next to her, but then you did. And was that did that become like a kind of a big relief moment, or
not yet? No, not yet. It was. I think I was so afraid of sleep. Like I was so. I've had anxiety my whole life, but I think sleep anxiety was the worst anxiety I've ever experienced. I was so afraid of it. And because I was scared I would lose my mind. I was really scared it was going to make my health and physical issues worse. And I was also really scared that I was just going to lose my mind.
Yeah.
And then, but there was also a couple, I feel like I'm really skipping through, and maybe I've got like maybe some general like advice or points that I would like specifically say in the end, but I'm just trying to chronologically go through it. During that time, a couple of things that also helped was, so obviously Michelle helped because she's gone through like her own health stuff, and she said how she realized for her how stress actually makes it worse than lack of sleep does. Which in my head, I still didn't fully believe it, but hearing that did plant a seed somewhere in my brain. I also had my therapist at the time, and she kind of did like acceptance and commitment therapy. And for a long time, I didn't really speak to her about insomnia, just because I was worried I'd get, the sleep hygiene advice. And I thought, or that whatever she would react to would like be triggering. But then I did end up talking to her about it, and turns out like acceptance and commitment approach is very in line with the sleep school, and that really helped to just kind of have another voice of reason being like, if you can't sleep, just lie there with your eyes closed, just accept it. Like just that, like just having someone else in my life to like believe in me and not be freaking out about the fact that I'm not sleeping really helped. And then I've joined this like support group for my chronic dizziness, and turns out a lot of people there had the same issue as me. And the woman who like leads it, she's an audiologist, and she also deals with like chronic pain and stuff. But she kind of had the same belief that the anxiety about sleep makes it worse than the sleep deprivation. And I kind of started to, and I guess this would be like my advice for people who have like chronic health issues or any type of health issues, how I kind of overcame that. And I still have that triggering thought sometimes, but I would realistically like look at my symptoms, like my health symptoms, and I would look at my sleep, and I would realize actually there's been days where I had horrible sleep, and then the next day was kind of okay. And then there was also days when I had 12 hours, great sleep, and I would have a horrible symptom day the next day. Not always, but there were days like I just started to kind of challenge that correlation in my head. Whereas then I looked at like, oh, highly anxious days or highly like stressful, horrible, like emotional turmoil days almost always resulted in like worse physical symptoms or like flare-ups. And then when I'm like happy or relaxed or at ease, it's usually better, and there's like a much stronger correlation there than there is with sleep.
Yeah, super helpful. And it just, I think, if for anyone who is kind of unsure of how powerful this insight is, to me, it's like when you think that if I don't sleep enough, I'm going to have a terrible day in terms of all these symptoms, then of course there's this pressure to sleep. You feel like I have to sleep. Sleep's important, which then keeps it from sleeping well, right? So when you see what you saw, that, oh, that isn't as correlated as how anxious I am during the day, that correlates with these symptoms, then the thought becomes, okay, so I want to sleep, of course, everybody does, but it's not like the pressure to sleep comes down so much, and that makes it easier, right?
Yeah, like the world won't end if you don't sleep, type of thing. Yeah. And then things were kind of getting better. And then I moved back to London and I started a new job. I just started working in hospitality because I wasn't ready to go to like a 9-to-5 again. And at the time I was still it was kind of, I was sleeping again and I was sleeping alone, but it was still, you know, I was still thinking about sleep a lot. I wasn't back to 100% normal. I mean, I'm not sure how I'm still back to 100% normal, but sleep is not like ruling my life anymore, but at the time it still was. And then it helped because when I worked in hospitality, you realized like a lot of people that work in like bars and stuff, their sleeping schedules are so messed up. Their whole lifestyles are so messed up. And I would talk to my friends there, they were like, yeah, I didn't sleep like the last 2 nights, like haha. And they weren't worried about it. They were just existing, and they would get up the next day and go to work. And that really helped. Like witnessing that really helped, because I was like, maybe I'm not broken, like maybe it's okay. And maybe that happens to a lot of people, and they're still here, they're still alive, they're still healthy, they're still happy. Also I think the physical exhaustion of like being on your feet and working and moving around really helped, like mentally as well. But you know, when you're like working, because before I worked like a corporate job, you wake up, you sit behind a screen all day, and then you go to sleep. Like realistically, like you probably will be able to sleep because you're still tired, but it's, I don't know, you don't really use up your energy. You use up your mental energy, but your physical energy is still there. So yeah, I think kind of moving around all day and stuff unintentionally actually made a difference as well. But obviously if that happened like earlier on and I just started to obsessively exercise while still obsessing, probably wouldn't make a difference, but it was kind of like a positive side effect.
Yeah, that's really so nice. I mean, I think, you know, there's a change of scenery where you go from like having no real obligations, right, to like you have obligations, you're moving around, there's variability in terms of like, you know, your physical activity and your mental activity, you're more challenged, there's more distraction. I think all this can be really, really helpful. And by the way, when you decided to move back to London, were you scared about that decision, or it felt like this is the right decision?
Oh, I was so scared. And every time when I was about to do it, like my sleep got worse, like my physical symptoms got worse, like I was so scared. And then actually when I did it, my parents were really like supporting me to go, because I think they realized it's time for me to get back to normal life. My mom came with me for a week, and then they were like, well, if it's too bad, you can just come back. I went there for a week with my mom, and then my mom left. And actually once I was there and I was in normal environment, your attention goes to other things. Like it's just how your brain works. Like if you give your brain an opportunity to latch onto like normal things, like hanging out with friends, like dating, going to work, hobbies, your brain will like latch onto other things. And that's something I like found to be real for insomnia, for anxiety, for like physical health stuff that I've been through. Like your brain wants to feel better, you just kind of need to like allow it. And by kind of isolating yourself and hyper focusing on your problems and anxieties, you're gonna make it worse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's like the problem is like the brain is this like problem solving machine, right? And when it goes into like internal problem solving mode, like I'm going to fix this insomnia, right? Then you say that becomes the sole focus, and it tends to we have more trouble then when we're in like problem solving mode. But then we give it other, activities or something, and their direction goes there. Then like, all these things that can happen by itself, like feeling peace of mind and peaceful sleep, it starts happening by itself because the direction is in that, right?
So I would get anxious in the evening. But every now and then, if I was excited about my life or something happening in my life, I would catch myself thinking about something else. Like here and there. Like there were glimmers of, actually, I'm not thinking about sleep right now. And one thing that really helped was, and I probably found that on your channel. I'm not sure, but I'm sure you must have said it at some point as well. You can still sleep if you're anxious. Like anxiety doesn't stop you from sleeping. Because a lot of the time, like I would still, let's say I was fine in the day, I wasn't thinking about sleep anymore. But then I got to bed and my heart was pounding because just being in bed was really triggering. And then but then I would literally tell myself, like, I was anxious before and I was able to sleep. Like being anxious, if my body is tired, it's going to sleep. Like anxiety is not going to stop it from it. So I was just like, I'll let my heart pound. Sometimes I would like put my hand on my heart and like purposely try to feel it. Not always. Like sometimes that felt like the right thing. Sometimes it didn't. But I would just allow it to beat like crazy. I would allow the heart palpitations to happen. And almost always I ended up sleeping. And I have to say, maybe I didn't like emphasize that enough. Over this whole course of time, I still had a lot of like blips of insomnia. So it wasn't linear at all. And sometimes they were long. Like sometimes they would go on for weeks. So like as frustrating as it is, like it's actually like not linear. And I had a lot of kind of dips where like I thought, oh, this is it. Like this time it's not getting better. I've lost it, but it does come back.
Wow. And, that just kind of reminded me of like I said in one of the newsletters that I'm going to start asking a question that so many people have to the guests here in Talking Insomnia, which is, did you at some point during the journey think like, I'm that one person who will never get better? I'm kind of a hopeless case.
Yeah, oh my God, so many times. Like in kind of that December time where, where I really spiraled and ended up in a dark place, like, yeah, I was like, the whole time I was so convinced that for me it's different because I have other health stuff. That's like inevitably like tied in with sleep. So I'll never be able to like completely remove the pressure of sleep because there's always going to be that. So yeah, that was a big issue for me. But yeah. It's like that with everything, as I've learned, also with just anxiety unrelated to sleep and like with physical stuff, your brain will always try to convince you that you're special. Like because your anxiety is there to protect you from danger, like interestingly enough. So it will always be like looking for reasons why you can't relax, like why you need to stay on alert. So your brain will always try to convince you that something's different about you and that you can't relax, you need to stay on alert. But it's lying to you.
Yeah, I think that incredible point. I don't need to comment on it because you said it so well already. And you're moving back to London. You start kind of re-engage with life, and it sounds to me as if like, maybe the most intense periods are behind you, but there's still these like week-long areas where you have a lot of still like go back into some struggle, but then you kind of come out of it, and it sounds to me as that's kind of where we're going in the story. But am I right, or what happens next?
No, honestly, because the next part is really long and not interesting. So for the next year or so, I'm also at that point, like I got in a relationship, so I was sleeping next to someone else. So I was like, oh, I'm sleeping I also started taking amitriptyline, not because of insomnia. I made a point to like not, because I know it's like so commonly prescribed for insomnia. So I like refused to take it for a really long time. So I only started taking it once I was already like sleeping 90% of the time. But only like a really low dose. And actually, when I started taking it, I think because I was just so like focused on it, for the first 10 days, I was really struggling with sleep, because I think my brain was just like trying to notice, like, is there a difference? But at that point, like, if anyone's like listening to this being like, oh, she only got better because of medication, because I used to think that when someone mentioned medication in your success stories or whatever, like, no, at that point, like, I was already like 90% of the time sleeping. So it didn't cure my insomnia. And my sleep pattern kind of continued. Like, I still had nights where I couldn't sleep despite being on it. Like, sometimes I read people say they take amitriptyline and they fall asleep immediately and can't wake up the next day. I've never had that effect from it. Like, it never felt like it affected my sleep. So yeah, so I was sleeping next to someone else. I would still have nights when I couldn't sleep, and rare, but they did happen, and I would kind of freak out and spiral a bit sometimes. Like, I would think, oh no, it's back. But actually the next night I would sleep. I kind of kept, even though I would freak out, I kind of maintained the same approach. So that was reminding myself of what I know, like what I learned from your channel, not kind of adapting my life to it. And also, so like, I wouldn't call in sick at work the next day because I couldn't sleep. Like, I would still go to work, who cares? And yeah, if I was anxious, I would let myself be anxious and go to bed. There were a couple things I still did, which was like, I used to, for context, I'm not in that relationship anymore. But I used to like argue with my ex-boyfriend because he would like want to go to sleep at, normal people time, like at 10. And I was still like kind of postponing going to sleep because I was still a bit anxious. Which I will be honest, like, I don't have a set time when I go to bed. I just go to bed when I feel tired. But I think that's okay. I think that's healthy.
Yeah, I think
More or less. Yeah. Like,
many people
I don't
do that,
see
yeah.
that as I'm not like, oh, tomorrow I need to wake up early, so I'm going to bed at 8 p.m. I don't do that because I don't think I'm going to sleep at 8 p.m. And I think if I'm going to bed before I'm sleepy, there's a higher chance I'm just going to like stress myself out about it and then end up more awake. Like, I just wait until I'm tired and then go to sleep. And if there's nights when I get like 4 hours of sleep, so be it. Maybe I'll make up for it the next night, or maybe I won't. And even if I don't, that's okay. I don't know. So I still kind of did that. And I guess like sleep was still it was a touchy topic in my head, but over time it just like, you get distracted. Like, I used to be afraid of, sleeping in other people's houses or not in my own bed. And then I just end up sleeping at someone else's house once and I didn't even think about it. And then the next day I was like, oh, wait, I slept in someone else's house. I didn't even like, so it was still, I think that's such a big point, is like, you just need to keep living your life, like keep allowing things to happen. And sometimes like things will naturally happen without you even like controlling it or actively trying to overcome something. It will just happen. And then you look back and think, oh, I did that without even thinking about it.
Yeah, that I've heard that so many times, particularly in the context of somebody who wants to come off a sleeping medication, And for some people, they kind of have a plan and they stick to the plan and that works for them. But for other people, it more becomes the like, I'm just going to continue taking this for now and I'll make a decision later on. And then exactly that happens. They're like, wait a minute, I forgot to take it and I slept,
Yeah.
And then that realization comes, and then it happens kind of naturally what you want.
So I would say that lasted for like about a year. And then the last couple of months, I would say I had another shift. So I went for a breakup in September. And actually, as traumatizing as it was, it didn't affect my sleep. And that was it. In fact, I think that was probably like my nervous system, like trying to process stuff. I was sleeping like crazy. Like, I would come home from work at 6 and I would just fall asleep. So that was interesting for me because I was like, obviously over that year, I did feel like, I wouldn't say I felt recovered from insomnia. I wouldn't say I identified as insomniac, but it was still a thing on my mind. And I still thought, maybe I'm just sleeping because I'm sleeping next to my boyfriend, or maybe I'm just sleeping because of like whatever. There was still like a doubt. And then so that was good. And then this was just before that. This is what prompted me to email you that I'm ready to talk about it. So because I was going over the last month, I was going for like hard time after my breakup. Also, this affected like my chronic health issues, so they like flared up. I had a really bad flare up, which was quite triggering. And then I went home for a bit to like recover, and I went to acupuncture because my mom pushed me to go, and I went to acupuncture, and I couldn't sleep all night, just like the first time. And I kind of spiraled for a couple of days. Like, for a couple of days, I spiraled. I was like, it's back. It's like history repeating itself. But I kept going with everything I know. And then I slept again. And I was like, no, it's okay. It's going to be fine. And after that, despite, all these horrible circumstances of like being heartbroken, the flare up in my dizziness, in my like pain and stuff, in my mental health was like really, really bad. This was like maybe like 2 months ago now, so I'm feeling a bit better. But despite all these like horrible circumstances, I was able to like overcome this dip in insomnia. And I was like, no, you know what, like I need to give myself credit. Like I can talk about it. And whereas I wouldn't say I'm like 100% back to where I was before, mainly because now I know something I didn't know then. Like I didn't know at the time it can get that bad. I didn't know that I can feel that bad. But I am sleeping and it's fine. And I think I can talk about it. And actually earlier this week, for a couple of nights, I really struggled with sleep. And yesterday I slept and I still feel fine. Like I didn't spiral. And sometimes, and I guess like that's something like that, I guess that's applicable to anxiety as well. But like, what is like a complete recovery? Like, does that mean you never think about it again? Or does that mean that like, even if you think about it, it's okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Because
To me, it's like
it
much more.
crosses my mind. Like
Of course
sometimes
you
I
will.
get
Yeah.
anxious, but then I don't spiral. I just deal with it and I get on with life, and then I feel okay again. And then probably at some point I don't feel okay again, and I have a little blip in my sleep as well, and that's fine.
Yeah. No, I think you said it so well, and I'll say that something that is a little bit challenging with these episodes, that the one that we're making now, the success stories, the Talking Insomnia stories, is that they don't fully show how much up and down and back and forth it can be. But your story has, you told it in a very powerful way. You kind of really illustrated how it's like, really a back and forth. And so I think this is super helpful. Yeah.
Like at the moment I have a totally different issue with sleep, which is like a bedtime procrastination, which I've done my whole life because I've got ADHD. But obviously during insomnia it kind of disappeared because I was too obsessed with sleep. But at the moment I'm really annoyed with myself because I procrastinate with going to sleep until like 3 a.m. and like, but that just shows I'm not afraid of not sleeping at the same time, because when I was afraid of not sleeping, I was procrastinating going to bed because I was afraid of not sleeping, but it was different. So I think to me that just like shows like, oh, is my sleep perfect? Do I have the perfect sleeping schedule? No, but like insomnia or fear of insomnia is not ruling my life, which is ultimately what I want.
Yeah. I mean, that is it. That's like when we feel free and we can live our life, in the way we want to. I think there's nothing more valuable than that. That's incredible. And
Yeah.
I want to ask you maybe two more questions. And one is this one: if you could kind of go back, or if you think about times where things were really difficult, maybe in the beginning there, what do you wish somebody would have told you that you never heard from anyone?
Oh, I knew what was the first thought, but I'm sure everyone's heard that, which is like, don't research. Whatever you do, don't research. But like, first off, sleep is overrated. Like, you're gonna be okay. Like, it's literally overrated. People don't sleep for so many reasons. Like, doctors don't sleep. Like, new moms don't sleep. Like, sleep is overrated. Like, yeah, you might feel a bit tired the next day. So what? Like, you're gonna be okay. And it's really like, it's even for like emotional regulation, because that was a big one for me. I was like, yeah, but then the next day I'm more anxious. Yeah, but the anxiety and stress about sleep is making that worse as well. Like, there's been times where maybe you went out for a party and you didn't sleep that night, and then the next day you were fine, you weren't melting down. And yeah, that's a big one. The second one is, I mean, that's definitely been said to you, but that's one I still remind myself of all the time, was like, your body will sleep. Like, it just will. So
Yeah.
there's no need to worry about it, because it will. And even now I say that to myself when I can't sleep. I'm like, I will sleep. If not today, then tomorrow. Another one that really helped me was, because one thing I really struggled with was, so I've always had the issue of falling asleep. There was, in the depths of it was also waking up early and waking up not being able to go back to sleep, but it was always, the main issue was always falling asleep. And I would obviously then, as a lot of people, I would close my eyes and my brain was just hyper aware of what was happening. So I was trying to find signs that I'm falling asleep, and then I would be like, oh, I'm falling asleep, and wake myself up. Like, I know that's really common. That was a big issue I had for a long time. And then I heard you say once how if you look back on when you are sleeping, you can actually never remember the point where you fall asleep. So there's no point searching for it to notice it, because it doesn't exist, because you're just asleep. So that really, actually, after I heard that really helped. That obviously it's not perfect, and there were still nights where I was on the lookout for it, but I was just reminding myself. And then when I would wake up the next day, I would think, can I remember when I fell asleep? And you never can.
Super helpful. Great points. And if you had heard those, or some other person would have heard those, I'm sure that would have been really helpful. And now, finally, here, last question for you is: have you learned things from this sleep struggle that has been helpful in other areas of life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I've like mentioned, I really think this approach is applicable to like anxiety in general. Kind of, by fighting something, you're teaching your brain that it needs to be afraid of it. Like, or either by fighting something or by avoiding something. So let's say it's same, like, you're afraid of not sleeping, you avoid going to bed, you avoid talking about sleep, you avoid thinking about, you're teaching your brain that that's something to be afraid of. Like, let's say you've got anxiety, you've got train anxiety, like my best friend does, by avoiding going on a train, by like avoiding exposure, avoiding triggers. You're just reinforcing that, and that's so applicable to anxiety in general. I also, like, I found a lot of parallels between that and even like physical health, because yeah, like, obviously physical health is a bit more complex, and a lot of the times there are things that are, organic issues or physical issues, but that side of things the doctors can treat. But your nervous system is so closely tied into your physical health. Like, if your nervous system is dysregulated, it's so much more difficult for your physical body to recover as well. And in order to like regulate the nervous system, it comes down to acceptance again, and like feeling safe. And by fighting something, by making something into danger, like, you're not teaching your body, you're not teaching your brain to feel safe. And it is a work of progress. Like, there's a lot of things I still struggle with. I still struggle with anxiety and stuff, but like, I still ultimately believe in that. And like, from my life, like, it's proven to be true over and over again. And then the same thing goes to kind of living your life. It's same with anxiety, it's same with like your health. Sometimes you can't do everything, and that's okay. but the chances are always you can do more than you think you can.
Yeah.
And like usually you end up positively surprised. And it's same with sleep. Like you can do more after a sleepless night than you think you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. You know, really, really powerful interview, Maja. So grateful for you sharing it. And so, yeah, I would just say thank you on behalf of myself and the community. And thanks so much for being here, and be in touch now.
Thank you, Daniel.
Bye now.